Welcome to Deep Sleep Tales, a place where timeless stories meet gentle narration. Tonight I bring you a story from the tranquil corners of the past, slowly, word by word, to soothe you and lull you into a peaceful sleep.
I wonder, where are you right now? Which city are you listening from? If you'd like, you can share in the comments. This is a place where people from all over the world seek peace.
If these stories bring you comfort, you might consider subscribing to our channel, but there's no pressure, just an invitation. Now it's time to rest. Settle into your bed, slowly close your eyes. Take a deep breath and exhale. Let go of all the day's fatigue. In November of 1884, on one of the narrow, winding streets in the small town of Ashburn in northern England, a modest bookshop stood hidden among stone-walled buildings. Above the shop's entrance hung a wooden sign bearing the words Blackwood Sons, booksellers in faded gold letters, letters that had weathered years of rain, snow, and wind until they were nearly illegible, yet still clung to the wood with a certain dignity. The building itself rose 3 stories, constructed of brick, its windows small and framed in dark brown paint, curtained with thin fabric so that little could be seen from outside. Only a faint glow escaped during the evening hours. On this particular November evening, the sky hung heavy with dark gray clouds, and darkness fell before 4 o'clock, as though night arrived impatiently. Rain had begun that afternoon, starting as a gentle drizzle before gradually intensifying, and now in the early evening it struck the sidewalks, rooftops, and window panes with a steady, insistent, yet somehow gentle rhythm. The streets were slick, cobblestones gleaming beneath the lamplight, and occasionally a carriage passed, the sound of horses' hooves echoing against the stones, wheels cutting through puddles. People hurried along with hats pulled low, coat collars raised, umbrellas in hand, rushing home to sit by the fire and drink hot tea. But the door to Blackwood Sons remained open. A small brass bell above the entrance chimed sweetly with each opening, and now its faint echo lingered in the stillness. Behind the display window, rows of books lined the shelves, their covers in deep shades of brown, green, and burgundy, some bound in leather, others in cloth, all waiting silently, searching for readers, hoping to be discovered page by page. Light from the lamp inside fell across these volumes, with a soft yellowish glow that spilled outward onto the sidewalk, into the rain, toward passers-by like an invitation, like a warm hand extended. Inside, the shop's owner, Mr. Henry Blackwood, sat behind his desk. Henry was a man of 55, medium height, slightly stout, his hair beginning to gray, but his face was kind, his brown eyes warm, and perpetually attentive, perpetually thoughtful. He had worked in the shop all day, showing books to customers, taking orders, arranging shelves, and now in the evening's quiet, he studied the ledger on his desk, reviewing the figures. Though his mind wasn't truly on the numbers, he glanced out the window from time to time, watching the rain fall, the street emptying, thinking in that calm, weary, yet peaceful way. The shop's interior was warm. In the back corner stood a small iron fireplace, where logs burned, flames dancing in a soft, steady pattern, heating the entire room. The crackle of wood, the whisper of flames could be heard occasionally, and these sounds were soothing, almost musical. Along the walls, wooden shelves stretched to the ceiling, and on these shelves sat hundreds, perhaps thousands of books, each in its place, each waiting silently. Narrow corridors ran between the shelves like a labyrinth, stretching from one end to the other, from darkness to light, from the known to the unknown. Small oil lamps hung from the ceiling, fashioned from brass, their light soft and flickering, casting shadows across the walls, books, and floor. The shop's floor was wooden, made of old planks worn smooth over the years, creaking occasionally underfoot, but even this sound was pleasant, familiar, a sound of home. A small rug lay across the planks, its pattern faded but clean, spread around a desk. On the desk, beside the ledger, stood a candle, its flame swaying gently, and also a cup of tea, steam still rising, warm and inviting. Henry occasionally lifted the cup to his lips, sipped, then set it down again, the movement slow, deliberate, almost ritualistic. Outside, the rain continued, and the sound of drops against the glass came like steady music. Henry raised his head and looked toward the window, seeing that the street was nearly empty. Only a few people passed, hurrying beneath umbrellas, and a horse-drawn carriage was disappearing into the distance, its wheels sliding over wet stones. The street lamps had been lit, gas lamps casting a yellowish, soft glow that blurred in the rain. Henry drew a deep breath. The air smelled of books, old paper, leather, ink, and also of wood smoke, tea, and a faint dampness. These scents mingled, merged, creating an atmosphere both comforting, familiar, and safe. Henry drew a deep breath. The air smelled of books, old paper, leather, ink, and also of wood smoke, tea, and a faint dampness. These scents mingled, merged, creating an atmosphere both comforting, familiar, and safe. Henry Blackwood had spent most of his life in this shop. His father had opened it years ago, when Henry was still a child, and Henry had grown up here, among the shelves in the scent of books. His father had taught him to read, to love books, and to conduct business, how to speak with customers, how to take orders, how to organize the shelves. His father had died years ago, but the shop still bore the name Blackwood and Sons, because Henry hadn't wanted to change it. Sons, it said, though Henry had no son. Only himself, and this truth sometimes brought him sadness, but he had accepted it. Life was like that. Some things would happen, others would not. Now, in the evening silence, Henry sat at his desk, no longer looking at the ledger, just thinking. He thought about the day, the customers, the sales, but these weren't really important. He thought about his life, the past, his memories. He thought of his father, his gentle voice, his smiling face. He thought of his mother, who had died years ago, her hands, her embrace, and he thought of his own life, solitary but peaceful, the same routines every day, the same streets, the same shelves, the same books. This life might not be exciting, but it was satisfying, meaningful, worthwhile. It was nearing 6 o'clock, and Henry thought perhaps it was time to close. Few customers came at this hour anyway, in this weather. People were home now, preparing dinner, sitting by the fire. Henry slowly rose from behind the desk and began walking among the shelves. He reached out, touching the spines of books, feeling the bindings, the texture of leather, the stiffness of cloth. Each book was a world, a story, a life, and here on these shelves were hundreds of worlds, hundreds of stories, all waiting silently to be opened, read, discovered. Henry moved slowly down the corridor, his steps making soft sounds on the wooden planks, firelight following from behind, creating shadows between the shelves. He approached the window, drew the curtain aside slightly, and looked out. The rain still continued, perhaps lighter now, but still steady, still persistent. The street was almost completely empty. Only one person was visible in the distance, a figure in a black coat carrying an umbrella, walking slowly. Henry watched this figure and saw that the person was heading toward the bookshop, slowly, unhurried. Henry released the curtain and returned to his desk. Perhaps another customer would come, or perhaps the person would simply pass by. Either way, it didn't matter. Henry was patient, never rushed. He sat behind his desk, picked up his cup, took one last sip of tea, and waited. A few minutes later, the bell above the door chimed sweet and soft, and the door opened slowly. Cold air swept in, and for a moment, the rain sound grew sharper before the door closed again, and silence returned. Henry lifted his head and saw that a young woman had entered, shaking out her umbrella, unfastening the buttons of her coat. The woman was 25, perhaps 26, of medium height and slender build. Her hair was dark brown, pinned up, though a few strands had fallen against her cheeks, damp from the rain. Her face was pale but lovely, with delicate features, and her eyes were a greenish gray that now surveyed the shop's interior. The shelves, the lamps, the fire. She began removing her coat, revealing beneath it a dark blue dress, high-collared and long-sleeved, plain but elegant. She wore thin leather gloves, which she also slowly removed and tucked into her bag. Henry rose to his feet. Politely, "Good evening," he said, his voice soft and respectful. "Welcome." The woman turned to him and smiled faintly. "Good evening," she replied. Her voice was also gentle, with a slight hesitancy, but courteous, kind. "I hope I'm not disturbing you." "Are you still open?" "Of course," said Henry. "I haven't closed yet. Please, make yourself comfortable. Is there anything I can help you with?" The woman considered for a moment, then shook her head. "Thank you, but I only wanted to browse a bit, if you don't mind. It's so rainy outside, and I needed to take shelter." Henry understood. Sometimes people came this way, just to take shelter, to warm themselves, to catch their breath, and Henry always welcomed them, because the shop wasn't merely a place of business, it was a refuge, a place of peace. "Of course," he said. "Please stay as long as you like. If you need anything, don't hesitate to ask." The woman smiled again, this time more easily, and bowed her head in thanks. Then she walked toward the shelves, slowly, her steps light, nearly soundless. Henry sat down again, but his eyes followed the woman not with curiosity, simply with attention, with respect. The woman approached the shelves, reached out her hand, touched the spines of books, read the titles, the authors, and moved slowly down the corridor, from one shelf to the next. The shop's interior grew quiet again, only the crackling of the fire, the sound of rain, and occasionally the woman's footsteps could be heard. Henry leaned over his desk, glanced at the ledger, but wasn't really reading, it was merely pretense. His mind was on the woman, wondering who she was, where she'd come from, what she sought, but he wouldn't ask, because such questions weren't appropriate, they were personal. People came and went, and everyone had their own stories, their own reasons, their own secrets. As the woman browsed the shelves, Henry observed her from the corner of his eye, and saw that she looked at the books with genuine interest, not merely scanning, but reading, thinking, choosing. She pulled a book from the shelf, opened it, looked at the pages, examined the cover, then returned it. She took another book, held this one longer, read a few lines, then placed it back on the shelf with a smile. She moved slowly, shelf to shelf, book to book, and this slowness, this care, pleased Henry. Most people came in haste, chose quickly, left quickly, but this woman was different, as if she had time, as if she wasn't rushing. A few minutes later, the woman approached Henry's desk, a book in her hand, a small volume bound in burgundy leather. "May I purchase this?" she said, her voice still gentle. Henry took the book and looked at it. It was poetry, Christina Rossetti's poems, an old edition, beautifully bound. "Certainly," he said, "an excellent choice. Do you enjoy Rossetti?" The woman nodded. "Yes, very much. Her poems, they're so quiet. They come from such depth. I especially like reading them on winter days." Henry smiled. "I understand. Yes, her poetry suits winter well, suits silence, the inner world. I read her from time to time myself." He took the book, named the price, and the woman opened her bag, withdrew the money, and handed it to him. Henry accepted the payment, rang up the receipt, then carefully wrapped the book in brown paper, tied it with string, and handed it to her. "Thank you," said the woman, taking the package and placing it in her bag. "And thank you for the shelter as well. You're very kind." "You're welcome," said Henry. "You're always welcome here. I hope you enjoy the book." The woman smiled, then turned toward the door. But as she approached it, she paused and looked back. "Forgive me," she said, slightly hesitant, "but do you always stay open this late?" Henry shrugged. "Sometimes, especially on rainy days like this. People need shelter, and I'm happy to be here. It's better than sitting alone at home." The woman nodded, understanding. "I see. You're very thoughtful. Good night, Mr. Blackwood," said Henry. Henry Blackwood. "Good night, Mr. Blackwood," said the woman.
I'm Margaret.
Margaret Hayes. "Good night, Miss Hayes," said Henry, and the woman opened the door. The bell chimed, cold air rushed in again, and the woman stepped out, opened her umbrella, and disappeared into the rain. The door closed. The bell fell silent, and the shop grew quiet once more. Henry remained at his desk, seated, thinking. Margaret Hayes, a beautiful name, and a beautiful woman, kind, courteous, thoughtful. Henry wondered where she'd come from, where she was going. But these things didn't matter. This was only an encounter, brief, accidental, but pleasant. Sometimes life offered such small moments, small connections, and these too were a kind of beauty, a kind of meaning. Henry stood from the desk and walked to the door. He looked outside, into the street's darkness, into the rain. He couldn't see Margaret, she'd already gone. Henry turned the lock, flipped the sign to closed, and began extinguishing the lamps, one by one. Slowly, the shop darkened. Only the firelight remained, and this light was flickering and soft, casting shadows on the walls. Henry went to the fire, sat in the armchair, and drew a deep breath. He was tired, but peaceful. The day had passed. Evening had come, and now it was time to rest. He closed his eyes, felt the fire's warmth on his face, and thought of Margaret, the book, the encounter. Perhaps she would come again, perhaps she wouldn't. Either way, it didn't matter. Life flowed on, time passed, and Henry was here among his books, beside the fire, peaceful and content. The next morning, Henry rose early as always, dressed, ate breakfast, and went to the shop. The weather was still rainy, but lighter now, more of a drizzle. The streets were wet, the sky gray, but Henry's spirit was peaceful. He unlocked the shop, lit the fire, lit the lamps, and prepared for the day. Customers came and went. He sold a few books, took a few orders, and the day moved slowly forward, calm routine, familiar. In the afternoon, around 3 o'clock, the doorbell chimed, and Henry looked up. Margaret Hayes had entered again, this time not quite so damp from the rain, but still gentle, still reserved. Henry smiled and stood. "Good afternoon, Miss Hayes," he said.
Welcome back.
"Good afternoon, Mr. Blackwood," said Margaret. "I hope I'm not disturbing you." "Never," said Henry. "It's a pleasure to see you. Did you enjoy the book?" "Very much," said Margaret, smiling. "I read it last night, and it was beautiful." "Thank you." "I should thank you," said Henry, "for coming to purchase it. How may I help you today?" Margaret hesitated slightly. Then, "Actually, I wanted to speak with you if you have time. About books. I mean, if that's all right." Henry was mildly surprised, but pleased. "Of course," he said. "Please, sit down. Would you care for tea?" Margaret relaxed, smiled. "Tea would be wonderful, thank you." Henry went to the back room, prepared the pot, added the tea, and waited for it to steep. Meanwhile, he thought, who was this woman? What did she want? But he wasn't worried, only curious, with a pleasant curiosity. The tea steeped. He poured it into cups, placed them on a tray, and brought it to the front room. Margaret had seated herself in the small armchair beside the desk, looking comfortable, though still somewhat reserved. Henry offered the teacup. Margaret accepted it with thanks. Henry took his own cup, sat across from her, and waited patiently. Margaret took a sip of tea, then began to speak, slowly, thoughtfully. "Mr. Blackwood, I came from London a few weeks ago. I'm staying in Ashbourne with a relative, my aunt. My mother died last year, and I found myself rather alone, and my aunt invited me to come, to rest for a while to recover." Henry listened, silently, his eyes on Margaret's, understanding, non-judgmental. Margaret continued, "In London I was a teacher at a school for young children, but the school closed due to budget problems and I lost my position. And with my mother gone as well, everything became very difficult. My aunt said, 'Come here, stay a while. perhaps make a fresh start, and so I came. But I don't yet know what I'll do. I'm only waiting, thinking, reading. Henry nodded. I understand. I'm sorry for your loss and for your position, but you did well to come and rest. Ashbourne is a quiet place. Peaceful. I hope you'll feel better here. Thank you, said Margaret. Yes, it's very calm here. So different from London. And when I came to your shop last evening, the atmosphere inside, it was so comforting. The fire, the books, the silence.
When I went home, I thought about it, and today I wanted to come back to speak with you about books, perhaps, for your recommendations.
Henry smiled. I'm always happy to recommend books. What sort of books do you enjoy? Margaret considered. I love poetry, as you know, but I also love novels, especially quiet, thoughtful ones. Grand adventures and dramas don't interest me much. More, inner journeys, character studies, books that appreciate the beauty of everyday life. Henry listened, and in his mind, books began to circulate. He thought of the shelves. I see. Have you read George Eliot, Middlemarch, or The Mill on the Floss? Her novels are exactly as you describe. Deep, thoughtful, character-focused. Margaret's eyes brightened. George Eliot, yes, I've heard the name, but I haven't read her yet. Middlemarch is a long book, isn't it? But perhaps now is the right time. I have time. Yes, it's long, said Henry, but worthwhile. Every page is carefully written. Every character vivid. I have several copies here I can show you. Margaret smiled, looking pleased. You're very kind, Mr. Blackwood. Yes, please, I'd like to see them. Henry stood. Margaret stood as well, and together they walked to the shelves. Henry guided Margaret, corridor by corridor, shelf by shelf, and showed her books, explained them, offered recommendations. Margaret listened, made mental notes, and occasionally pulled a book, opened it, read, then either returned it or kept it. And this process, this slow wandering, this search for books, brought peace to them both. It was a kind of sharing, a kind of connection. An hour passed this way, perhaps more. Time didn't matter much. In the end, Margaret chose 3 books. Middlemarch, a Thomas Hardy novel, and an Elizabeth Gaskell. Henry wrapped the books, handed them over. Margaret paid, and together they returned to the desk, finished their tea, which had gone cold by now but was still pleasant. Margaret stood, prepared to leave. Thank you so much, Mr. Blackwood. Today, I had a lovely time, and thank you for the books. I should thank you, Miss Hayes, said Henry. Speaking with you was very pleasant for me as well. I hope you enjoy the books, and I hope you'll come again. Margaret smiled, a warm smile. Of course I will, if you'll permit me. You're always welcome, said Henry. Margaret walked to the door, stepped outside, and Henry watched her from the window as she slowly disappeared. Then he turned back to his shop, to the shelves, to the fire, and sat in his armchair and thought. Today had been a good day, a beautiful day. A connection had been made, small but meaningful, and perhaps it would continue, perhaps it wouldn't, but right now, this moment was enough. Days passed, weeks passed, and Margaret returned again, and again and again. She came 2 or 3 times a week, sometimes to purchase books, sometimes simply to talk, sometimes just to sit in the shop, read and warm herself by the fire. And Henry welcomed her each time, prepared tea, conversed, recommended books, and slowly, quietly, a friendship developed between them. Gentle, respectful, genuine. Part 2. Margaret spoke of her life, her past, London, her mother, her work, her dreams, her fears, and Henry listened, patiently, understandingly, and sometimes shared his own stories, his father, the shop, the years, the solitude, the peace. And these sharings, these conversations, brought comfort to them both, made them feel less alone, more connected, more understood. In mid-November, one afternoon, Margaret arrived at the shop carrying a small basket. The scent of fresh bread rose from it, and something else too. Henry couldn't quite make out what, but it was pleasant. Butter, honey, perhaps a freshly baked cake. When Margaret entered, she appeared slightly embarrassed, her cheeks flushed, Perhaps from the cold, perhaps from shyness. "Good afternoon, Mr. Blackwood," said Margaret. Her voice is always soft and polite. "I hope you're not having a busy day." Henry rose from behind his desk, smiling. "Good afternoon, Miss Hayes." "No, today has been quite calm. A few customers came this morning, but it's quiet now. It's always a pleasure to see you." Margaret placed the basket on the desk slowly, carefully. "I thought perhaps we could have afternoon tea together. My aunt baked bread this morning, and I made some preserves, and I thought perhaps I could share them with you. If that's all right." Of course, Henry's face brightened. This kind gesture, this small offer of sharing, warmed him inside. "Of course it's all right. How very thoughtful of you. Really, you're too kind. Please, sit down. Let me prepare the tea." Margaret sat in her chair, looking more relaxed now, and Henry went to the back room. He took the pot, heated the water, added the tea leaves, and waited for the water to boil. Meanwhile, he thought of Margaret, her gentle face, her soft voice, and these thoughts made him happy, filled him with peace. How many years had it been? How many years had passed without such a connection with someone so genuine, so meaningful? He had customers, of course, and some had been coming for years, were familiar, but Margaret was different. She was no longer just a customer. She was a friend, perhaps more, perhaps like family, like a sister. Or Henry had to stop his thoughts because he didn't quite know what he felt, and perhaps he didn't need to know. What mattered was this moment, the beauty of this moment, the warmth of this sharing. The tea steeped, Henry placed cups on the tray, the sugar bowl, the cream pitcher, and took out small porcelain plates. He opened the basket Margaret had brought. Inside was indeed fresh bread, still warm, the crust looking crisp and golden, and a jar of preserves, deep red, looked like cherry preserves, and a small package of butter. Henry added these to the tray as well and returned to the front room. "There we are," he said, setting the tray on the desk. "Our tea is ready, and this bread smells wonderful." Margaret smiled, looking pleased. "Thank you. My aunt makes excellent bread, the old-fashioned way, with yeast, letting it rise for a long time. And the preserves are mine. I made them last night. Cherry preserves, a bit tart, a bit sweet." Henry sat across from her, poured tea for both of them. Margaret cut the bread into thick slices and spread butter on them. Then the preserves. Henry did the same and bit into the bread. Flavor burst in his mouth. The softness of fresh bread, the creaminess of butter, the sweet tartness of preserves. "Excellent," he said sincerely. "Truly excellent." "Thank you so much, Miss Hayes." "I should thank you," said Margaret. "You've given me so much time, patience, friendship. This is only a small gesture." They ate in silence for a while, sipped their tea, chewed the bread, and outside the wind blew gently, tapping lightly at the windows. The air had taken on November's chill, but inside the shop it was warm. The fire burned, and this warmth was not merely physical, but emotional too. The comfort that came from two people being together. Then Margaret began to speak, slowly, thoughtfully. "Mr. Blackwood, I'd like to ask you something if it's not improper." "Of course," said Henry. "Please, ask." Margaret took a sip of tea, held the cup in her hands, felt its warmth. Were you ever married or engaged?" "Forgive me, perhaps it's too personal a question, but I wondered." Henry smiled, a slightly melancholy smile. "No, it's not too personal. It's fine. No, I was never married. In my youth, once perhaps there could have been a connection, but it didn't happen. Her name was Sarah, our neighbor's daughter. She was a beautiful girl, kind, intelligent. We knew each other for several years, talked, took walks together. My father approved, my mother too. But Sarah had other plans. She wanted to go to London, to the big city, for a more exciting life, more opportunities. And I wanted to stay here, to continue my father's shop. And so our paths diverged. She left. I stayed. A few years later, I heard she'd married. A merchant, a wealthy man. I hope she's happy." Margaret listened, her eyes on Henry's. understanding, compassionate. I'm sorry, that must have been difficult. Henry nodded. It was difficult once. Yes, but over time, I accepted it. Everyone has their own path, their own destiny, and I found happiness here, in my own way. The shop was enough for me. Books were enough. Customers were enough. Am I lonely? Yes, sometimes. But am I unhappy? No, not really. Life gave me different things, and I'm grateful for them. Margaret was quiet for a moment, then spoke, softly. You're very strong, Mr. Blackwood. Very patient, very accepting. I'm still learning that. This acceptance, this peace. Henry looked at her kindly. You'll learn it too in time. You've already begun to learn. Coming here, leaving London behind, that's courage. That's acceptance. And you have strength. I know this. You just don't realize it yet. Margaret wiped her eyes lightly. Tears had formed, but she was smiling. Thank you. Talking with you does me so much good, you know? You give me hope, give me strength, and you give me the same, said Henry. Since you've been coming here, my days are brighter, more meaningful. Loneliness feels less like loneliness. Silence fell again, a comfortable silence, and they both finished their tea, ate the bread, and simply sat, gazing at the fire, listening to the wind outside. Then Margaret spoke again. May I look at the shelves? I'd like to buy a new book, but I'm not quite sure what I want. Perhaps you could recommend something. Of course, said Henry, rising as well. Come, let's look together. And they walked to the shelves, side by side. And Henry showed her books, explained them, described them. This shelf is French authors, Balzac, Hugo, Flaubert. This side is English classics, Dickens, the Bronte sisters, Thackeray. Here is poetry, Wordsworth, Coleridge, Shelley. And here are new releases, new authors. Margaret listened, reached out to the books, touched the bindings, ran her fingers along the spines. She pulled one out occasionally, opened it, read a passage, then either returned it or kept it in her hands. There are so many choices. I hardly know where to begin. Then, said Henry, let me choose a few for you, ones that suit your taste. And he selected them, carefully, thoughtfully. A Thomas Hardy, Tess of the D'Urbervilles, an Elizabeth Gaskell, North and South, and a poetry collection, William Wordsworth's selected poems. These three, he said, might suit you. They're all deep, thoughtful, character-focused. Hardy can be rather heavy, melancholy, but beautiful. Gaskell is more balanced, hopeful, and Wordsworth focuses on nature, the inner world. Margaret took the books, looked at them, read a few lines from each. Perfect choices. I'll take them all. Thank you, Mr. Blackwood. You're welcome, said Henry. And they went to the desk. Henry wrapped the books. Margaret paid and prepared to leave. But before going, Margaret turned to Henry and said, Mr. Blackwood, if it's all right, may I come again next week for tea? Perhaps this time I'll make the tea, and you can bring the bread. Henry smiled, feeling warmth inside. Of course.
I'd be delighted.
Which day of the week? Thursday afternoon. Thursday is perfect. And Margaret left, and Henry watched her from the window and thought that life sometimes offers small surprises, small gifts, and these are very precious, very meaningful. Days passed, and Thursday came, and Margaret came as she'd promised, and this time she truly did make the tea, bringing her own pot, a special tea blend, Earl Grey scented with bergamot, and Henry had brought bread from the bakery in town, fresh and warm, and they sat, drank tea, ate bread, and talked for hours about books, about authors, about life, about memories. Margaret spoke of her life in London, teaching at the school, the children, how she loved them, how she taught them, what games they played. And Henry listened, imagined the classroom, those children, how Margaret must have looked speaking with them. And then Margaret spoke of her mother, how she fell ill, how she slowly weakened, how in her final days she held Margaret's hand, how she closed her eyes peacefully. And as she told this, Margaret's voice trembled, her eyes filled, but she didn't cry, only quietly remembered. And Henry reached out his hand, held hers gently in support, in understanding. And then Henry spoke of his own mother, how she died young from an illness, and how his father had been so grieved but remained strong for Henry for the shop. And he spoke of his father, what a wise man he'd been, how he loved books, how he treated customers, everyone equal, everyone with respect, and how one day, one winter morning, when Henry arrived at the shop, he found his father in his armchair, as if sleeping but not waking, gone with a peaceful expression. And Henry remembered that day, that pain, that loneliness, but also that acceptance, that maturity, because death was part of life, and everyone would go, sooner or later, and what mattered was what you left behind, what mark you made. Margaret listened and cried softly for Henry, for her own mother, for all losses, and Henry's eyes filled too, but he didn't cry, only felt, and they sat like that, hand in hand, silently, and this silence was a kind of healing, a kind of sharing, a kind of bond. Then after the tea was finished, the bread eaten, the tears dried, Margaret said, "Mr. Blackwood, I'd like to show you something, if it's all right." And she opened her bag, withdrew a small notebook, leather-bound, old, worn. "This," she said, "is my mother's journal. I found it after she died, in her room, in her drawer. I've read some pages, and she wrote such beautiful things, memories, thoughts, dreams, and I thought perhaps I could share a few lines with you." Henry nodded. "Of course, I'd be honored." Margaret opened the journal to a random page and read aloud, slowly. March 15th. Today Margaret turned 5. I made a cake. We blew out candles, sang songs. Her eyes were shining. She was so happy. I gave her a little book, a book of fairy tales, and she said, "Mama, will you read to me?" And I read for hours, and she listened quietly, imagining these moments. These small moments are the meaning of life, not grand events, but small joys. Margaret paused, then closed the journal. My mother was always like that, noticing small things, valuing small joys, and I learned so much from her. But I'm still learning. Henry smiled gently. Your mother was a wise woman, and you're like her in that way. You value small things, books, tea, sharing. That's a beautiful thing. Margaret nodded. Thank you. And you're the same, you know. You also value small things. Your shop, your books, your customers. I think that makes us similar. Yes, said Henry. I think it does. They sat together a while longer, speaking of lighter things now. The weather, the town, neighbors Margaret had met, customers Henry had served. The conversation flowed naturally, comfortably, and when Margaret finally rose to leave, promising to return the following Thursday, Henry felt a profound contentment settle over him. Weeks passed, and these Thursday teas became a ritual. Every Thursday Margaret came, sometimes bringing tea, sometimes cake, sometimes biscuits, and Henry always welcomed her warmly, prepared the table, stoked the fire, and they talked about books, about life, and sometimes sat quietly, simply enjoying being together. One Thursday near the end of November, the weather turned very cold, and snow began to fall, lightly at first, then steadily. Margaret arrived wearing a thick cloak, a hood over her head, shivering from the cold. Henry immediately brought her to the fire, made hot tea, gave her a blanket. You shouldn't have come in such weather, he said, concerned. You could fall ill. Margaret laughed lightly. It's all right, I'm used to the cold, and a bit of snow won't keep me from having tea with you. Henry smiled, though his concern didn't fade. Still, be careful. Your health is important. Yours too, said Margaret. You be careful as well. At your age, a cold can be dangerous. At my age, said Henry in a playful tone. I'm not that old. I'm only 55. I know, said Margaret, laughing, but still, be careful. They drank their tea and talked, and this time the conversation wandered, and at one point Margaret asked, Mr. Blackwood, have you ever traveled, outside of Ashbourne, to distant places? Henry considered. A few times in my youth. I went to London, to a book fair, to see new publications. I went to York, to see the history. I went to Edinburgh once, It was very beautiful, but generally, no, I haven't traveled much. I'm happy here. I'm comfortable here. I understand, said Margaret. I haven't traveled much either. I was born in London, grew up there, and came here. But sometimes I think I wish I could have seen more places, more cultures. You still have time, said Henry. You're a young woman. Perhaps opportunities will come. Perhaps, said Margaret, though her voice wasn't quite convincing. But right now, being here is enough. I'm at peace here with you, in this shop, among these books. Henry looked at her and saw that Margaret truly was at peace, had settled, and this made him happy. I'm at peace with you too, Miss Hayes. Very happy. Silence fell, and the snow was visible through the window. Falling slowly, white flakes, and the world was growing quiet, softening. The snow continued through the afternoon, accumulating on the street outside, on the windowsills, transforming Ashbourne into something from a storybook. Margaret stood and went to the window, pressed her hand against the cold glass, watched the flakes swirl and dance. It's beautiful, she said softly. I'd forgotten how peaceful snow can be. Henry joined her at the window, stood beside her. Yes, it quiets everything, makes the world feel smaller, safer somehow. They stood together in silence, watching the snow, and Henry was acutely aware of her presence beside him, the faint scent of lavender from her clothes, the gentle rise and fall of her breathing. It had been so long since he'd stood this close to another person, shared this kind of quiet intimacy. He found himself thinking thoughts he'd long ago put away, thoughts of companionship, of belonging, of home being more than just four walls and familiar routines. Mr. Blackwood, Margaret said, turning from the window. May I ask you something rather forward? Of course, Henry replied, curious. Do you ever wish your life had turned out differently? Not that you're unhappy. I know you're not. But do you ever wonder what might have been? Henry was quiet for a long moment, considering. Sometimes, he admitted. When I was younger, more often, I'd wonder what would have happened if I'd followed Sarah to London, if I'd chosen a different path. But as I've grown older, I've learned that wondering serves little purpose. We make our choices, and we live with them, and we find meaning where we can. He paused, then added, Why do you ask? Margaret returned to her chair, wrapped the blanket more tightly around herself. Because I find myself doing that so often lately, wondering, what if Mother hadn't died? What if the school hadn't closed? What if I'd made different choices? And it exhausts me, this wondering. I want to be more like you, accepting at peace. You're too hard on yourself, Henry said gently, returning to his own chair. You've suffered losses I cannot imagine, one after another. Give yourself time. Peace isn't something we achieve all at once. It's something we grow into, slowly, like a plant reaching towards sunlight. Margaret smiled at the metaphor. That's beautiful. You should have been a writer, Mr. Blackwood. No, Henry said, chuckling. I'm better as a keeper of other people's words than a maker of my own. But I'm glad if something I said brings you comfort. They talked on as the afternoon darkened into evening, the snow still falling steadily outside. Eventually, Margaret rose reluctantly, saying she should return to her aunt's house before the snow grew too deep. Henry insisted on walking her partway, and together they stepped out into the white transformed street, their footsteps the first to mark the fresh snow. In early December, Margaret came to the shop, and this time she looked different, a bit excited, a bit anxious. She sat in her chair, accepted her tea, and began to speak. Mr. Blackwood, she said, I want to tell you something. I've made a decision. Henry looked at her, curious. Yes, I'm listening. I've decided to stay here, in Ashbourne, at least for a while longer. My aunt has offered that I can remain with her, and I don't want to return to London. There's nothing left for me there. But here I've found peace, friendship, and I thought perhaps I could find work here, perhaps teach again, or something else. Henry smiled, looking genuinely pleased. That's wonderful news, Miss Hayes. I'm so glad that Ashbourne has given you reason to stay, and I'm certain you'll find work. You're talented, kind. People will appreciate you. Margaret blushed slightly, but was pleased. Thank you. Your support means a great deal to me, you know, these past weeks, talking with you, coming to this shop. It's helped me immensely. I consider you a friend, and I hope you feel the same. Henry nodded. Of course, I consider you a friend as well, Miss Hayes, and I'm very happy that after such a difficult period in your life, you've found some measure of peace. You deserve it. Margaret's eyes filled slightly, but she was smiling. You're very kind, Mr. Blackwood. Truly. A silence fell, comfortable and warm, and they both sipped their tea, gazed at the fire, and thought their own thoughts. After a moment, Margaret spoke again. There's something else. My aunt knows someone on the town council, a Mrs. Pemberton. She mentioned that the small school on Mill Street is looking for a teacher. The previous teacher moved away last month to care for an aging parent. It's not a large position, only a dozen or so children, but she trailed off, looking hopeful. But it's perfect, Henry finished for her. Miss Hayes, you must apply. Those children would be fortunate to have you. Do you really think so? Margaret asked, and Henry could hear the vulnerability in her voice, the need for reassurance. I know so, Henry said firmly. You told me yourself how you taught in London, how the children loved you. Why should it be any different here? Margaret set down her teacup and clasped her hands together. You're right. I'll speak with Mrs. Pemberton this week, and Mr. Blackwood. Thank you for believing in me when I struggled to believe in myself. That's what friends do, Henry said simply. They sat together until the light began to fail outside, talking of smaller things now. Books Margaret had finished, new stock Henry was expecting, the Christmas season approaching, and when Margaret finally left, Henry stood at the window long after she'd disappeared from view, a strange mixture of happiness and longing filling his chest. He was happy she would stay, happy she'd found a purpose, but he also recognized with a clarity that surprised him that his feelings had grown beyond simple friendship. He cared for Margaret in a way he hadn't cared for anyone since Sarah, perhaps more deeply than even then. The thought should have frightened him, a man of 55 entertaining such notions, but instead it brought a quiet joy, an unexpected gift in the winter of his life. The shop seemed warmer that evening, the books more vivid on their shelves, the fire more welcoming. Henry locked the door and turned the sign, but his heart felt strangely open, strangely alive. And so, beginning the very next day, Margaret started working at the shop. Henry showed her what needed to be done, how to arrange the shelves, how to categorize books, how to speak with customers, how to operate the register, and Margaret learned quickly, was attentive, careful, and Henry was pleased with her, very pleased. On the first day, Margaret arrived early in the morning, excited and slightly nervous. She'd pinned her hair more carefully than usual. Her dress was dark green, simple but elegant, and she carried a notebook for taking notes. When Henry opened the door and saw her, he smiled. Good morning, Miss Hayes. Welcome, officially, as my employee. Margaret smiled, blushing slightly. Good morning, Mr. Blackwood. I'm very excited. I hope I'll do well. I'm certain you will, said Henry. Don't worry. I'll teach you everything, slowly, step by step. First, Henry showed her the shop's layout in detail. Here, he said, gesturing to the shelves on the left, is classical literature, Shakespeare, Milton, Chaucer, and others. These shelves are organized alphabetically by the author's surname. Each book has a small label on the spine. See? This label indicates its category and location. Margaret approached, examined the labels, took notes in her book. I see. And the other shelves. On the right side, Henry continued his modern literature, novels and poetry written in the last 100 years. These are also alphabetical, but also divided by genre. Novels in one section, poetry in another, essays in another. Margaret listened, took notes, and studied the shelves. The books were neatly arranged, each carefully positioned, their covers clean, dust-free. How often do you clean these shelves? She asked. Once a week, said Henry. Saturday mornings before the shop opens, I use a dusting cloth, and I remove the books one by one. Wipe them, return them. It takes time, but it's necessary. Books don't like dust, especially old bindings. Margaret nodded. That makes sense. I can help on Saturday mornings. I'd be glad of it, said Henry. 2 people will be faster. Then Henry showed her the back shelves, the narrow corridors, the attic-like sections. Here, he said, are rare books, old editions, special copies. These are very valuable. We must be careful. We show them to customers if they ask, but they shouldn't touch them directly. We hold them, we turn the pages. Margaret looked at these books with admiration. Some appeared centuries old, their leather bindings worn but still beautiful, their pages yellowed but intact. Where do these books come from? She asked. Various places, said Henry. Some my father collected, some I've acquired at auctions, some customers have brought to sell. Each has its own story. This one, for instance, he picked up a book carefully, is a 1623 edition of a Shakespeare folio, very rare. A collector sold it years ago, needed the money. I bought it because it was so valuable, both monetarily and culturally. Margaret touched the book lightly, reverently. Incredible. It's like a treasure. It is, said Henry, and our duty is to protect these treasures, pass them on to future generations. Margaret's eyes brightened, as if she'd found meaning. Yes, you're right. This isn't just a shop. It's like a library, a museum. Exactly, said Henry, smiling. Then Henry showed her the register area, behind the desk, the ledger, the cash drawer. Here, he said, you greet customers, sell books, take payment. Prices are written on the back covers of books or on their labels. If you're not sure, ask me. No problem. We count the drawer every evening, record it in the ledger, and start fresh in the morning. Margaret listened carefully, and Henry showed her how to write receipts, how to calculate change, how to speak politely with customers. Most importantly, said Henry, patience and courtesy. Some customers know what they want. Choose quickly, buy and leave. Some wander for hours, can't decide, and we wait patiently. Help them, but don't pressure them. Some just want to talk. They're lonely, and we listen. Offer friendship. This shop isn't merely a place of commerce. It's a community center, a refuge. Margaret nodded, understanding. I see. You're not just a bookseller. You're a kind of guide, a friend, a counselor. Perhaps, said Henry, humbly. I only do what I can. The first customer arrived at 10 o'clock, an elderly man, Mr. Thompson, who'd been coming for years and loved history books. Henry introduced Margaret. Mr. Thompson, this is Miss Hayes, my new employee. She'll be serving valued customers like yourself. Mr. Thompson bowed politely. Pleased to meet you, Miss Hayes. Welcome. Mr. Blackwood's shop is one of the finest places in town. I'm sure you'll make wonderful contributions. Margaret blushed, but smiled. Thank you, Mr. Thompson. I'll do my best. Mr. Thompson was looking for a book about the Napoleonic Wars, and Henry knew exactly where it was. But to teach Margaret, he asked her, Miss Hayes, where are the military history books, do you remember? Margaret thought, then pointed to the right rear. There, in the history section, bottom shelf. Correct, said Henry proudly. Let's go look. And together they went, and found the book, and Mr. Thompson was very pleased, and purchased it, and as he left he said to Margaret, I hope we'll see you often, Miss Hayes. Good day. Good day, said Margaret, and after the customer left she turned to Henry. That felt good, really helping someone, making them happy. Yes, said Henry, that's the best part of this work. Not earning money, though that's necessary, but touching people's lives, adding something to them. Throughout the day, several more customers came, and with each one Margaret grew more comfortable, more confident. Henry watched her, how she spoke, how she smiled, how she listened patiently, and saw that Margaret was suited to this work, had a natural talent. One customer, a young woman, was looking for romantic novels, and Margaret recommended Jane Austen, the Bronte sisters, and the woman was delighted, bought 3 books. Another customer, a middle-aged man, was looking for a gift for his son, an adventure novel, and Margaret suggested Stevenson's Treasure Island, and the man thanked her, said his son would love it. At midday, the shop quieted, and Henry brought bread, cheese, and fruit from the back room. A simple lunch. We usually eat here, he said. We don't close at midday, but we take turns. One waits in front, one eats in back. Margaret agreed, and they ate together, quietly, comfortably. Then Henry said, "This afternoon, I'll teach you to organize the shelves. Sometimes books get mixed up. Customers put them in the wrong place, or we hastily leave them somewhere random. We need to straighten them a few times a week." Margaret stood, eager.
I'm ready.
"Where do we start?" "Here," said Henry, pointing to the classical literature shelves. "Let's check these. Make sure they're in alphabetical order." And they worked, side by side, quietly, harmoniously. Margaret pulled out books. Henry checked them, corrected any that were misplaced. Then they returned them. The process was slow, required attention, but was also soothing, almost meditative. Feeling the weight of books, smelling the pages, sensing the texture of bindings. Margaret occasionally paused, opened a book, read a few lines, then returned it with a smile. "Have you read all these?" she asked, looking at a Dickens novel. "Most of them," said Henry. "Some several times." "I love Dickens, especially Great Expectations and David Copperfield. His characters are so vivid, his stories so human." "I love him too," said Margaret. "When I lived in London, I'd seen the streets Dickens wrote about. Now I imagine them when I read." "That must be a wonderful experience," said Henry. "I don't know London well, but I know it through books." "Books show us the world," said Margaret thoughtfully. "We can see everywhere, every time without traveling." "Yes," said Henry. "Books are a kind of time machine, a kind of portal." They continued working, and hours passed, and they didn't notice time flowing. Finally, evening was approaching, and Henry said, "That's enough for today, I think."
You did very well, Miss Hayes.
"Really, I'm very pleased." Margaret smiled, tired but happy. "I'm very pleased too, Mr. Blackwood. Today was a wonderful day. I learned so much, and I felt useful." "Because you are useful," said Henry, "and tomorrow will continue. You'll learn more, work more." Margaret prepared to leave, put on her coat, pulled on her gloves. "See you tomorrow, Mr. Blackwood. Good evening." "Good evening, Miss Hayes." And Margaret left, and Henry remained, and closed the shop, extinguished the lamps, but didn't put out the fire, sat beside it, and thought about the day, about Margaret, about the developments. Life was changing, slowly, but in a beautiful way. He was no longer alone. Now he had a friend, a partner, like family, and this change wasn't frightening. On the contrary, it was comforting, peaceful. Days passed, and the shop's atmosphere began to change, subtly, but noticeably. Now there were two people, two voices, two presences, and the shop seemed more alive, warmer, more welcoming. Customers noticed this, and some commented. One morning, Mrs. Clark came in, a middle-aged, kind woman looking for books on gardening. Henry introduced Margaret, and Mrs. Clark was very pleased. "How lovely, Mr. Blackwood. You're no longer alone. Miss Hayes, it's so nice to see you. Are you new to town?" "Yes," said Margaret. "I came a few months ago. From London? My aunt lives here, and I'm staying for a while." "Wonderful," said Mrs. Clark. "Ashbourne is a lovely place. I hope you'll be happy here. And Mr. Blackwood's shop is the heart of the town. This is a special place." "Yes," said Margaret, smiling. "Very special." Mrs. Clark bought a gardening book, and as she left, she said, "I hope we'll see you again, Miss Hayes. Perhaps one day you'll come for tea. To my house, I'll show you my garden." "I'd be delighted," said Margaret. "Thank you, Mrs. Clark." And these kinds of invitations began to increase. People liked Margaret because she was kind, genuine, listened, and Margaret liked people because they were warm, open-minded, accepting. In London, in the big city, people had been more distant, more hurried, but here, in the small town, everyone knew each other, everyone helped each other. One afternoon, when the shop was quiet, Margaret and Henry sat by the fire, drank tea. Margaret said, Mr. Blackwood, I'm very happy here. Truly, I wake up in the mornings and I think about coming here, and I smile. I haven't felt this way in a long time. Henry looked at her gently. I'm happy too, Miss Hayes, since you came here. The shop is more alive. I'm less alone. It's like a gift. Unexpected but precious. Margaret blushed slightly. You're very kind, but I feel the same way. You've given me a place, a purpose, a family. I don't know what I mean to you, but for me, you're like a brother, like a father, like a friend. Henry's heart warmed at these words. And you're like a sister to me, a friend, a partner. Perhaps life brought us together for a reason. Perhaps we were both lonely, and we found each other. Margaret nodded. Yes, perhaps, and I'm very happy about it. Silence fell, a comfortable silence, and they both sipped their tea, watched the fire. Then Margaret spoke again. Mr. Blackwood, I want to ask you something. If you'd like, of course. If not, that's fine too. Ask, please, said Henry. I've been thinking perhaps we could make small changes to the shop. I mean, not big changes, just small improvements. For instance, we could put new books in the window, changing them weekly so passers-by see new things. It catches their interest. Or we could create a small corner for children, little chairs, colorful books, so families come. Children play while parents choose books. Or we could put up a bulletin board, people leave notes, book recommendations, event announcements. Henry listened, considered. These ideas were new, different, but also interesting, promising. Those are good ideas, Miss Hayes. Really, I've never thought of such things, but they make sense. The window idea especially is nice. It would catch people's attention, and the children's corner is lovely too. There are young families in town. Perhaps they'd come. Margaret's face brightened. Really? You like them? Yes, said Henry. Let's try them. Slowly, step by step, but let's try. And so the next day they got to work. First they rearranged the window, removed the old books, replaced them with newly published novels, popular authors, seasonally appropriate books, a Christmas story, a winter novel, a poetry collection, and the window became more colorful, more inviting. Passers-by stopped, looked. Some came inside, asked about the books. Then, in the back corner, they cleared a small space, moved old boxes, laid down a small rug, found 2 little chairs, and put children's books on the shelves, illustrated fairy tales, simple stories, and they hung a sign, Children's Corner. The first week, 2 families came with their children, and the children were delighted, sat in the chairs, examined the books, and the parents relaxed, could look at their own books, and sales increased slightly. They also made the bulletin board beside the door, a cork board with pins, and Margaret wrote a note. Feel free to leave your book recommendations and comments here. Let's share as a community. And the first day no one left notes, but the second day someone wrote, Pride and Prejudice is wonderful. I recommend it to everyone. And the third day someone else added, Will there be a book club meeting in December? And slowly, the board began to fill with notes, recommendations, questions, thanks. Henry and Margaret watched these changes and were pleased. The shop was no longer just a place of commerce. It was more than that, a community center, a space for sharing, a meeting point. One evening after closing, Margaret and Henry sat by the fire, tired but happy. Margaret said, Today was a good day. We sold 7 books, 2 new customers came, and someone asked about a book club. Henry smiled. Yes, a good day, and thanks to your ideas, Miss Hayes, you've given the shop new life. No, said Margaret. We gave it together. You allowed me, trusted me, supported me. This is teamwork. Yes, said Henry. Teamwork, and we're a very good team. In the evenings after the shop closed, Henry and Margaret would sit together by the fire, drink tea, talk. They talked about books, about authors, about life, and sometimes they sat quietly, just watching the fire. And this silence too was beautiful, comforting, because they were no longer alone. They were together. One night in mid-December, snow was falling outside, heavy snow, and Henry said, Miss Hayes, in this weather it will be difficult for you to get home. Perhaps you could stay here. There's a guest room upstairs, simple but clean. We'll have tea together in the morning, then start work. Margaret hesitated, then accepted. If it's all right. Yes, thank you. Really, this snow doesn't look like it's going to stop. Henry went upstairs, prepared the room, spread bed linens, lit candles, warmed the room. Then he came down, took Margaret, showed her the room. There, simple, but it should be comfortable. If you need anything, don't hesitate. Tell me. Thank you, Mr. Blackwood, said Margaret. You're very kind. You're welcome, said Henry. Good night, Miss Hayes. Good night, Mr. Blackwood. And Margaret entered the room, closed the door, and Henry went to his own room. And that night they both slept peacefully because they were safe, warm, not alone. In the morning, the snow had stopped. The world was pure white, silent. Henry and Margaret had breakfast together, fresh bread, butter, preserves, tea, and they talked, laughed, made plans for the day. In this moment, this morning, was very precious because it was like a family morning, warm, genuine, safe. Winter deepened, and Ashbourne was blanketed in snow streets, roofs, trees, all white. But Blackwood and Sons remained warm, remained bright, and Henry and Margaret worked every day together in harmony. Customers came and went. Books were bought and sold and read, and life continued, slowly, quietly, but beautifully. One day in early January, Margaret brought Henry a proposal. Mr. Blackwood, she said, I've been thinking perhaps we could hold a small event at the shop, something like a book club. We'd invite people, choose a book, read it, then gather to discuss it. It would bring people closer together and might also bring new customers to the shop. Henry considered this and found it was a good idea. Yes, that could be lovely, but where would we start? Who would come? I've spoken with a few people, said Margaret. My aunt, neighbors, some ladies from the church. There's interest. If you approve as well, we'll set a date, choose a book, and begin. Henry smiled. I approve. Let's do it. And so, the book club was founded. The first meeting was held in February, in the evening hours, after the shop had closed. 8 people came, mostly women, some elderly, some young. Margaret chose the book Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice, and everyone had read it, had prepared. They sat inside the shop, by the fire, drank tea, ate cake, and discussed the book for hours. Everyone spoke, shared their thoughts, debated the characters, and Henry and Margaret guided them, asked questions, offered answers. And the evening was wonderful. Everyone left happy and promised to come to the next meeting. These meetings continued every month with different books, and the group grew 10 people, 12 people, 15 people, and the shop became a community center, not just a place where books were sold, but where people met, talked, shared. And Henry and Margaret were very happy about this, because this was their dream, bringing books and people together, building community, making connections. Spring came, the snow melted, flowers bloomed, days grew longer, and life continued. At the shop in Ashbourne, in Henry and Margaret's lives, they were no longer just friends. They were more than that, like family, like a team. 2 people who completed each other, supported each other, loved each other. A romantic relationship? Perhaps not in the traditional sense, but there was a deep bond, deep respect, deep affection. One spring evening in May, after the shop closed, they both went outside for a walk to wander the streets. The air was mild, the sky clear, stars shining. They walked side by side without speaking, just quietly, and the silence was peaceful. They came to the edge of town, to a small park, and sat on a bench, watched the river, listened to the flowing water. Margaret spoke softly. Henry, I want to tell you something. Henry turned to her, waited. Margaret no longer called him Mr. Blackwood, only Henry, and this familiarity was beautiful. I'm very happy right now. I don't think I've ever been this happy in my life, and it's because of you. You gave me a home, a purpose, a family, and I'm so grateful to you. Henry smiled gently. I'm grateful to you too, Margaret. You brought color to my life, meaning I'm no longer alone, and that's very precious. Margaret rested her head on Henry's shoulder, and Henry put his arm around her, protectively, and they sat like this for a long time, watching the river, watching the stars, and thought about life, the past, the future. And they didn't know what the future would bring, but this moment was enough. This moment was perfect, and they were at peace, together. Years passed. Henry and Margaret continued working together at the shop, at the book club, in the community. They didn't marry because they didn't need to. They were already family, already together. Margaret moved into Henry's house, the big old house, and they lived together, but in separate rooms, respectfully, but close, always close. The shop grew, became renowned. People came from distant places, not just to buy books, but to feel the atmosphere, to talk with Henry and Margaret, and they welcomed everyone warmly, kindly, patiently, and every customer felt special, felt valued. One day, years later, Henry had grown old. His hair had turned completely white. His steps had slowed, but his eyes were still warm, still kind. Margaret had aged too, but she was still beautiful, graceful, peaceful. One evening, after the shop closed, Henry turned to Margaret and said, Margaret, I've been thinking, perhaps it's time I retired. I've grown old. I tire easily, but I don't want to close the shop. Perhaps you'll continue. You'll run it. This shop is yours now, as much as mine. Margaret looked at Henry, and her eyes filled. Henry, I can't do this without you. This shop is yours. Your spirit is here. Your legacy. No, said Henry gently. This shop is ours now. Your work is here too. Your love. And I know you'll continue it beautifully. I want to rest, but I'll be here, always with you. Margaret nodded through tears and embraced Henry, and Henry embraced her, and they stayed like this for a long time by the fire, among the books. And Henry retired, but never left the shop. He came every day, sat in his chair, drank tea, talked with customers, helped Margaret, and Margaret ran the shop, beautifully, carefully, as Henry had taught her, with Henry's spirit. And the shop lived on, grew, and years later still, people kept coming, still remembered that rainy evening, that first encounter, that Lamplit bookshop. And now you too can rest. This story has ended, but your night is only beginning toward a gentle sleep. The tale of Henry and Margaret, that quiet bookshop on a rainy November evening, those shelves lined with leather-bound volumes, those Thursday afternoon teas, all of it has been told. The pages have turned, one after another, until we've reached this final moment. And with this ending comes an invitation to let go. Close your eyes if they're open. Let the lids grow heavy, weighted as if by the softest fabric. There's no need to hold them open any longer. The day is done. Everything that needed to be accomplished has been accomplished. Every task completed, every word spoken, every step taken. Now there is only this. Rest. Let your breath slow. Find a steady rhythm. In through your nose, filling your lungs with cool, clean air. Out through your mouth, releasing everything. All tension, all worry, all thought. In, out. Your breathing becomes like the rhythm of waves on a distant shore. Predictable and calming, endless and eternal. Feel the weight of your body, your head, heavy against the pillow, sinking down, down, down into the softness. Your shoulders, releasing all the tension they've carried through the day, letting go, dropping, melting into the bed beneath you. Your arms, lying still and quiet at your sides, are folded gently across your chest, no longer needing to move or work or hold anything. Your legs, long and relaxed, feet growing warmer, toes uncurling, all effort draining away like water flowing downstream. You are sinking into the mattress, into the blankets, into the comfort that surrounds you. Let the thoughts in your mind drift away. The worries about tomorrow, they can wait. The regrets about yesterday, they are in the past and cannot be changed. The endless lists, the plans, the things you must remember. Let them all fade, become unimportant, dissolve like morning mist under the rising sun. Your mind is growing quiet now. Quiet as that bookshop after closing, when the last customer has left and the door is locked and the street outside is empty. Imagine, if you will, that you are there, in that bookshop, Blackwood Sons. The day is over, and the shop is yours alone. The wooden door is locked, the brass bells silent above it. The rain has stopped outside, and the street is quiet. So quiet you can hear the gentle drip of water from the eaves, a slow rhythmic sound, drip, 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 like a lullaby. Inside, the lamps have been extinguished, one by one. The brass fixtures no longer glow. The shelves of books recede into gentle shadow, their spines barely visible, their titles unreadable in the dim light. But you don't need to read them now. You've read enough. The stories are all there, waiting patiently, and they will wait until morning. The only light now comes from the fireplace. That small iron fireplace in the corner where logs have been burning all day. The flames have died down now, no longer leaping and dancing. Instead, there are only embers, deep red and orange glowing like tiny suns, pulsing gently with heat. And the sound, listen to the sound. The fire whispers. It crackles softly, a gentle conversation with itself. A small ember shifts, settling deeper into the ash. The last of the moisture in the wood escapes. A quiet sigh. Crackle, crackle. The embers breathe, expanding and contracting, alive but drowsy, warm but fading. This is the sound of ending, but also of comfort. The fire has kept you warm all day, and now, even as it fades, it continues to give heat, light, peace. The warmth spreads through the room. You can feel it on your face, gentle and soft, like the touch of a kind hand. It reaches your shoulders, your chest, your arms. It settles over you like a blanket, invisible but real, comforting but not overwhelming. You are warm, you are safe, you are protected. Breathe in that warmth, smell it. The scent of wood smoke, ancient and primal, connecting you to every fire that has ever burned, every hearth that has ever warmed a home. The smell of old books too, that particular perfume of aged paper and leather bindings and dust and time. The faint aroma of tea, long since finished but lingering still. These scents mingle in the air, creating an atmosphere of complete and total peace. Look at the chairs, two of them side by side facing the fire, empty now, but you can almost see them, Henry and Margaret, seated there so many evenings, talking quietly or sitting in comfortable silence. Friends, family, two souls who found each other in the rain and built something beautiful together, something lasting, something true. Their story is your story now. You've walked with them through these pages, through these months and years. You've felt their loneliness and their joy, their losses and their discoveries. You've sat with them by this very fire, drunk tea from these very cups, browsed these very shelves, and now their peace becomes your peace. Their rest becomes your rest. Let go of the story now. Let Henry and Margaret fade gently into the shadows, into the books, into the walls of this old shop. They're at peace. They're together. And you too can be at peace. The fire crackles once more. Softly. Crackle. Pop. Hisses. The embers glow a little dimmer now, their light fading from orange to deep red to almost black, with just hints of light peeking through the ash. Soon they will go out completely, and the room will be dark. But that's all right. You don't need the light anymore. Your breathing has slowed even more now. Each breath is deeper, fuller, more complete. In, out, in, out. You barely notice yourself breathing anymore. It's automatic, effortless, like the tide coming in and going out, like the earth turning on its axis, like the seasons changing, natural, inevitable, requiring no thought or effort from you. Your body is completely relaxed now. Every muscle has released its tension. Your jaw is loose, your tongue resting gently in your mouth. Your eyes are still, no longer moving beneath their lids. Your hands are open, fingers slightly curled, palms facing upward or downward. It doesn't matter. Your heartbeat is slow and steady, a reliable rhythm, a drum beating quietly in your chest. Thump, 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 thump. Outside, somewhere in the distance, an owl calls. A long, low note that echoes across the empty street, across the sleeping town, and then silence again. Perfect. Complete silence. The world is asleep. The town is asleep. The bookshop is asleep. And you too are drifting now, drifting down into that same gentle sleep. The fire gives one last little crackle, pop, and then even that stops. The embers have faded to black. The warmth remains, but the light is gone. The room is dark now, soft and welcoming in its darkness. There's nothing left to do, nowhere to go, nothing to think about or worry about or plan for or remember. Only this, sleep. Deep, comfortable, peaceful sleep. The sleep of someone who is safe and warm and loved. The sleep of someone who has come home after a long journey. The sleep of someone who knows that tomorrow will come. But for now, for this perfect moment, there is only rest. Let yourself drift down, down, into the soft darkness, into the warm silence, into dreams that will be gentle and kind. You can sleep now. You should sleep now. It's time. The story is over, and the night is here, and your bed is soft, and you are safe. Sleep well, dear reader. Rest until morning. Drift into your dreams as Henry and Margaret once drifted into theirs, and may you find the same peace they found, the peace of belonging, of connection, of love in its many forms. The bookshop will be here when you wake. The books will still be on their shelves. The fire will burn again tomorrow. But for now, let it all go. Let it all fade. Let sleep